Number 1. I've been a long-time lurker of Let's Not Meet, and I have a story of my own that still haunts me to this day. Let me set the scene for you. I was 7, currently 25, and my mother was dating a man with a daughter who was about 15. Her name was Christy. While she did not live with us, she did stay with us on some weekends. The reason this is important will come into play a little later. I grew up in a moderately isolated area in the South. My mother's house is on about 90 acres, most of it being heavily wooded. For the most part, it was quiet. The type of place most people don't lock their doors, and everyone knows each other. It was quiet until one sequence of events shook my community to its core. There was a man just 2 streets over from mine who murdered his girlfriend's entire family, including her, in their home over a dinner about 2 weeks before this event took place. It was also learned later that he had also murdered his mother and father in their home, as they were found after his girlfriend's family was. He hadn't been caught, and the local police were working with police in Tennessee, as there had been reportings of people sighting him there. My mother had gotten a security system installed, just to ensure our home was properly secured. We had alarms on every window and door in our house. On this Saturday, my mother got called into work, as she was an apartment manager, and there was an emergency that she needed to tend to. Her boyfriend had gone to work early that morning. My mother was very, very nervous about leaving. Due to the nature of the emergency, she thought it was best that Christy and I stay home, where we were safe. So she thought. She reluctantly left and let us know that her cell phone was always going to be on her if we needed her. Christy and I promptly set the alarm, made sure all the doors were locked. My mother had been gone about an hour, and we were deep into a movie on Disney and pizza. Suddenly, the alarm started blaring. Christy and I jumped up to see what was going on. On the way to the alarm, you have to pass a very large sliding glass door. What we saw there left us frozen. There was a man prying our door open with a crowbar. He saw us, made eye contact, and quickly ran off into the woods behind my mother's home. I will never forget what he looked like, or the sinister look he had in his eyes. We called the police, and then we called my mother, who had already been alerted by the alarm company. My mother actually arrived before the police did, due to how isolated we really were. When he described the man to the police, they immediately knew it was the man they were looking for. Of course, there was a massive investigation that day of the property and woods surrounding us. In the woods, they found cigarette butts, lots of canned food, soda bottles, and a makeshift tent from the tarp. The man had been living behind us the entire time, and even stealing food from our trash. When he was arrested, which was a few hours after the incident, he had admitted to watching our family to learn our habits, knowing that he could take advantage of the house when no one was there. Even now as an adult, this event still follows me. Just goes to show you that you really never know who is watching you. Number 2. So one day my mom and I were over at my grandma's house, as usual, just cleaning things, and my mom wanted to take me to the park that she always went to as a kid. When we arrived, we noticed that the park was nearly deserted, other than one single man dressed in all black, just wandering around the park aimlessly. We didn't think much of it because it was pretty cold outside, so of course not a lot of people would be there. As we arrived, the man just looked over at me. It made me so nervous. I looked up at my mom and she looked a little shaken too, but we decided just to ignore it and decided that he was probably just a local. As I was playing on the playground with my mom, keeping a close watch on me, I saw the guy walking across the field towards us. I jumped off the playground and walked over to my mom, and I just said to her, "Mommy, the man is coming to talk to us." She stood up and turned around towards him. She was surprised because he began to talk to her. He sounded friendly, but something was just not right about him. Something was just off. He walked away after a while, and I went over to the water fountain to get a drink, and I peeked over at him while I was getting a drink. He was coming straight towards me. Alarms started going off in my head because he was charging at me. My mom quickly sped over to me, and when the man got there, my mom was right there, so we turned around and walked away. But later, while I was playing on the playground, he walked back over to the bathroom. I felt really thirsty, so I asked my mom to come over with me to get a drink. As we walked over, the man just stood there looking at us. When we arrived, he said, "I have to pee. Can you guard me while I pee behind the bathroom?" My mom told him that he could just use the combination 1, 2, 3, 4 to get into the bathroom, but he said that it was gross in the bathroom and that he wanted us to stand next to him as he peed. My mom quickly grabbed my hand and noped the fuck out of there. As we started running, he got up and began to run with his pants and his underwear down to his ankles, and he kicked them off and began to charge full speed at us. My mom started to cry as we were running, and I was just entirely confused as to why this man was chasing us. But of course my mom understood the entire situation, so she could not stop crying. I began to fear for my life, because when I peeked behind myself, I saw the man holding a huge knife in his hands. All of a sudden I screamed, and my mom turned to look at him. She saw the knife too. I think we both had an adrenaline rush at the same time, because I ran faster than I ever did in my entire life, and my mom did the same. As we approached my grandmother's house, he was still running full speed ahead of us, so we decided to run onto the main road in hopes that a car would come by, see the man running at us. Just our luck, a police officer drove down the road, saw the man and jumped out of his car, pulled his gun out on the man, still with no pants or underwear on, so his junk was just out. He ran towards the man while he got out his handcuffs, quickly hit the man, which made him drop the knife onto the pavement. He handcuffed him and rushed him into the back of his car, told us not to worry, and that he would take care of him. He went on his way back to the police station, and we never heard about what happened to him, but I hope that his little ass is still in prison where he belongs. But let's just say, my mom and I never went to that park, ever, again. Number 3. My grandfather grew up on a chicken farm outside of Krakow, Poland. He passed away a few years ago at the age of 82. A few days before his passing on, due to an aggressive form of stomach cancer, he sat me down next to him in his old rocking chair and said in his familiar Polish accent, "After I took the boat to New York, I promised to leave this story behind." He didn't look up as he spoke to me, simply staring into his cup of black coffee. "It's been 70 years, and I must tell someone before I meet God. I was born in a small, quaint, empty town, which despite the Nazi occupation still functioned. We lived in this 2-bedroom farmhouse. My father, mother, and my brothers Michael and Igor. I'm sorry you never got to meet any of them. Anyway, Michael and Igor were twins. Identical twins, actually. We'd heard rumors of the Nazi fascination with identical twins. This forced us, and we already lived in a secluded part of the countryside, in the last occupied house in the town, to be even more reserved. In order to not go into the occupied towns, we basically ate only chicken and eggs for every meal, and whatever Mama could gather from the garden. It was lonely, but we survived. The only 2 things which were really hard on me were the fact I had to sleep in the basement, due to Michael and Igor being toddlers. They required my father and mother's attention. The basement was cold with only a small window, and moonlight was the only light I got. Because of this, I was always delayed going down there until I absolutely was exhausted, so I wouldn't have to lie there awake. On the nights that I couldn't manage to sleep, I would look out of the window, which gave me a small view of the garden and a large abandoned water well. This was my daily activity throughout those lonely, war-torn nights. In general, it was boring and uneventful, but occasionally I would catch a glimpse of a family, or even just a man, or 2 lovers sneaking their way through our garden, up to our front door. They always looked rushed and frightened, and sometimes wore tattered uniforms. What would follow were horrible sounds of banging and pleadings for whoever lived here to open up, followed by an argument between my father and mother over whether we should let them in. He moved in the chair to adjust himself. You see, son, we didn't know it. Well, at least I didn't. That we lived fairly close to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and those people were escapees. Well, did your father let them in? I asked impatiently. No. He said it would have been a death sentence for them, as well as for us. The Nazis didn't like Poles, but they tolerated us, and it was easier to hide Michael or Igor than an entire family. My father did what he had to, in order to keep his family alive. As the war went on, less and less people began showing up in the middle of the night. Only our chicken and vegetables began to disappear. Losing our only supply of food would not have been possible, and at this point my father knew it was probably the escapees, so he built a fence around our property. Despite this, the chickens continued to disappear. They weren't killed, they were simply gone, just vanished from their cages and pens. One night, I decided to stay up myself in order to see if I could find out the answer. I battled my tiredness until the wee hours of the morning, and despite the poor lighting and rain, I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a human figure run across the garden. I rushed upstairs to tell my father, and he ran outside with a knife, the best home defense weapon we could afford, but we found nothing. No one. The next day we did find something, though. Footprints leading from the chicken cages to the water well. They were made in the wet mud from the rain, and they were of bare feet. No shoes, no socks, just feet. My father had mercy on the man who was trying to find refuge, and left him a note, indicating that he had 2 days to leave, then he would begin to seal the well. I waited impatiently for my grandfather to tell me the fate of the man. The following night I conjured up the idea to take a blanket down to the well, to the man, since winter was creeping in. I waited until my parents were asleep and I snuck outside. I shouted down the well something friendly, indicating to the poor man my intentions were benign, and I began my descent, hands and feet clinging to the pegs which were attached to stones. As I approached the bottom, I smelled something absolutely horrific, and I pulled my father's flashlight from my pocket, tried to shine it on the man. Coming to the realization of just how large this well was, since it used to supply water for the entire town and its families. Families which no longer remained. But I found no man, only a hole in the stone where the wall of the well had collapsed, opening up into some type of crevice. Only 2 meters wide and 3 meters deep and tall. Inside sat not a man. Inside was a family, with only a skeleton-like creature as the only survivor. The light reflected off his sunken eyes and grayish skin, face covered in blood, with chicken carcasses scattered around. A pile of decomposing chickens next to a woman, a son, and a daughter, the children who must have been barely 5 years old. They seemed to have been dead for weeks. The man, if he could even be called that, just stared at the light, and I stared back, incapable of breaking his stare. I did not feel threatened by him, for he lacked any sense of aggression. He simply sat there crouched over without a sound, next to the putrefying body of his loved ones, and chickens he could only have been using as his source of water, as their meat was not eaten. He was empty, devoid of whatever in us makes us human. He should have realized his family was dead long ago, but he was still bringing food for their corpses. He couldn't accept it. He did finally turn his head, though, when I shined the light back onto the corpse of his daughter. He stared at her and sat down closer to her, continued to stare. "You can leave now. I'll open the gate so you can escape. My father will seal the well in the morning," I said to him. "Please leave now." My young voice and advice didn't seem to have any effect on him. At this moment I decided it would be better for me just to climb back up the well and leave. Hopefully the man would follow and escape. As I began my climb, I shined the light on him one final time. "What did you see, Grandpa?" I shuddered. A tear fell from his eye. He had become a man once again. He broke free from the delusion only when he saw the body of his dead daughter, which had been hidden by darkness. He realized he had been bringing food not to his family, but to corpses. That night it rained again, but I found no footprints leaving the well in the morning when my father sealed it. I certainly hope you guys enjoyed these 3 stories. Please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Sinful Society if you haven't already done so.